We regularly check in with voters in Georgia about their feelings on early education, and we've just completed a new poll of voter attitudes. I am pleased to be able to introduce our bipartisan team of pollsters, Beth Shapiro and Whit Ayers. As I do this, you'll see that there are full introductions in your agenda, so I'll just introduce them briefly here. Whit Ayers is a leading Washington, D.C. political consultant with over 30 years of experience in polling and survey research. He is the founder and president of North Star Opinion Research, and he is a frequent commentator on outlets such as NBC's Meet the Press, Fox News, CNN, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and USA Today. Beth Shapiro, who will begin our presentation, is the president of the Shapiro Group, a Georgia-based public opinion research and strategic consulting firm. She is called on as well for commentary with many of the same outlets, including CNN, Fox, and Georgia Public Broadcasting. She's a very active member of our Georgia civic community, and I am so pleased that both Whit and Beth are here to share their findings with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, GEEARS, for having engaged our firm and that of my long time and dear friend Whit Ayers, North Star Opinion Research. We are honored to have done polling for GEEARS at its inception, and again today, and again this year. And we're going to report to you some findings from a recent survey of Georgia voters. I'm going to have to try to bring numbers alive to you in your imagination. So I ask you to work with me, and if you do, I promise that I won't give you any homework when you leave. So let me tell you what we did. Our firms jointly conducted a telephone survey of likely voters in Georgia. We talked to a representative sample of 400, and it was a sample that's representative of the state geographically as well as demographically. We used live callers, which is still the gold standard for conducting public opinion research, and we talked to a significant proportion of respondents who live only in a household where they only have a cell phone. Again, gold standard of political and public affairs polling. The survey was conducted in August of this year. And we asked voters questions on early childhood education issues at both the state level and the federal level. And I'm going to talk to you about what we learned about state level policy, and then Whit's going to talk to you about federal level policy. And we only have 2 or 3 key points we're going to make. We're not going to burden you with a ton of numbers and data to remember. And I'll also tell you that you are going to get a handout when you leave that will have these findings on that. So you don't need to take a lot of notes in those fine little journals that GEEARS gave you, but if you want to, that's fine. So we started out by asking voters, and I'll give you a shorthand of the questions, asking them what they think is a greater priority for the state of Georgia right now: holding the line on taxes and spending, or making sure that there is sufficient funding for needs such as education. And what we found was, now remember in that video, in the school video a second ago, you saw the teacher in the sandbox with a little measuring cup? Well, if that was a measuring cup that measured 1/3, we found 2 cups worth, or 2/3 of Georgia voters who tell us that we should make sure that there is sufficient funding for needs such as education. It was actually 68%. Only 28% of voters statewide said that we should hold the line on taxes and spending. And what's particularly interesting about these findings, and again, you'll see this in the handout, is that support for spending money on needs, spending sufficient funding for needs, crosses party lines. So we had over half of voters, over half of Democrats, over half of Republicans, over half of independents say that we should be spending more, we should be spending sufficient funding on meeting needs. So it's the first of several places where we see that there is support across party lines, which as you may have noticed is not something that we see on a lot of issues either at the state level or at the national level. The next question we asked at the state level that we wanted to talk about today was about the use of lottery funds for voluntary pre-K. And the specific wording was, do you support or oppose Georgia using a portion of lottery funds to provide voluntary pre-kindergarten programs for 4-year-olds? And we had asked this question back in 2010 as well as this year. I'm not going to tell you how to do the math with the cups because it'll take a while to figure that one out. But what I will tell you is that we find that 87% of Georgia voters, which is almost 9 in 10 voters, say that we should be spending more lottery funds, we should be using a portion of lottery funds for voluntary pre-K. And this number has remained steady since 2010. It was actually 83% in 2010, it's 87% now. It's within a margin of sampling error, but essentially there's solid support that's been consistent over time for using a portion of these funds for 4-year-olds, for pre-K programs for 4-year-olds. And again, what we see with lottery funding is that there is support for this across party lines. It's one of the few times when we're looking at breakdowns by party where the bars for Democrats and Republicans are almost the same height. The support is that strong. It's something like 90% plus of Democrats support using lottery funds, over 75%, over 3/4 of Republicans support using lottery funds for pre-K, over 3/4 of independents. So it's an issue on which there is about the strongest kind of bipartisan support that you're going to see. So I'm going to turn this over to Whit, who's going to talk to you about some findings that we found on policy at the national level. My good friend, Dr. Whit Ayers.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Stephanie and Mindy, for the opportunity to work with you and work with GEEARS on this project. I was looking at those kids and I found myself thinking, were we ever that cute? I'm pretty sure I was never that cute. They're darling kids. In an earlier life, I taught 8th grade, and I can assure you 13-year-olds are not that cute, especially when you see 150 of them every day. I'm glad we've got some political officials and some elected officials and some candidates coming today, because education is the great unsung issue of American politics. I've never done a statewide poll where education was not the top 1, 2, or 3 issue facing the state, but even at the federal level, if you give voters nationwide a list of 25 issues with all our problems with the economy, with ISIS, with healthcare, education is still one of the top 5 issues facing the federal level in America. So I'm glad we're doing this, and I'm particularly glad we're focusing on early childhood education. We had a couple of questions in here about federal policy. One of which is Congress is considering a plan to help states and local communities provide better early childhood education programs to parents of young children. This 10-year program would provide states with $10 billion in grants each year for providing voluntary access to high-quality preschool programs to all low and moderate income families with 4-year-old children. It would also make available voluntary child care for infants and toddlers, as well as parenting skills education. Would you support or oppose this plan to help states and local communities provide better early childhood education? We got overwhelming support. A majority strongly support, another quarter somewhat support. Basically 3/4 of the voters in our survey said they supported Congress passing this plan. Support was consistent across genders. Democrats were the most supportive, but we still had a majority of Republicans and independents that supported this plan for early childhood education. The plan is attractive because it makes early childhood education and child care more affordable for working families, and because investing in our children is investing in our future. We asked another question about timing. Obviously, there are many important issues facing the country, but not every single one can be a top priority for the President and Congress. So in thinking about this early childhood education proposal, do you think it should be absolutely a priority this year, can be delayed until next year, or we should not pursue it? Once again, we got a majority saying it was absolutely a priority this year, another 20% saying it can be delayed till next year. That's 7 out of 10 saying that it was a top priority for either this year or next year. Once again, we got very little difference by gender. Democrats were most interested in saying it was a priority this year, but a plurality of both Republicans and independents said it was a priority this year, and you put it together with those who say they would like for it to be a priority for next year, and you get a majority of all three partisan groups saying this should be a priority for this year or next year. So the key findings of this survey: likely voters are predisposed towards supporting the state's early education programs, with this support crossing party lines. Likely voters express solid support for the plan under consideration by Congress, with majorities of all subgroups expressing support, and voters want action this year on the National Early Childhood Education Plan. Thank you.